Perfect. So I am really excited to have you join us today in this build up mini series conversation. So, welcoming Christine Malone, who is a championing for EDIB for, my gosh, for a while, for 20 years. I want to say over 20 years. And you're also currently the manager of EDI within Canada Post. So that's pretty exciting stuff. So I'm really, really excited for you to be here. So thank you so much. I'm really excited for this conversation because EDIB isn't something that's new. It's oftentimes spoken about widely across organizations. However, there's always this challenge in terms of how to really make change happen in a way where that's authentic, in a way where that's intentional. And there was kind of this genuine accountability as it relates to EDI, and there's still a lot of organizations that are struggling with it. In when it comes to talking about EDI and not necessarily reflecting it internally. So I wanted to talk to you specifically today because you've worked for the city before, and it's always different variations of change when it comes to EDI work, and so I just wanted to kind of dive in and ask you, what I guess if we were to reflect 5 years ago in terms of disability inclusion, um, how have we progressed in terms of change within the space across industry or industry wide at the moment, just based on your experience so far?
That's a big question, and in your opening, there's a lot to unpack in that discussion for
Yeah.
sure. First of all, I want to say thank you for having me and including me in these conversations. I think it's great to have these discussions in a very open way, and hopefully it'll spark individuals to have other conversations. Um, what I share always is my own lived experience around my own experience as a disabled woman who's also Indigenous. I'm Métis. I come from Saskatchewan. My family is still there, and but I'm proud to be a visitor on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. I live in Ottawa, so I'd like to just start by acknowledging that as well. Um, in terms of the changes, particularly to disability and the world of EDI and how accessibility plays into that, in the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of shifts. Um, and COVID, as you know, was a catalyst for a lot of these things. Prior to COVID, you were hearing a lot of accommodations to work outside of the workplace were just simply not possible. And
Mhm.
then we saw with the onset of COVID how that changed the workplace drastically for everybody. So in some ways, it did open up the doors for people in terms of uh, for disability related reasons, needing that support of being able to work from home. Um, and it provided that opportunity to say, oh, this is possible to do this and still get the same or better results from our employees and engage our staff in different ways that can be meaningful for the workplace and allow for that. The bottom line of any work is in our capitalist approach is always productivity, right? And so you can have both of those things in many different circumstances. So that's been a positive. I would put a little bit of a caveat on that though to say I think there's still we don't want to leave people behind in the process. So the issue of working from home and working remotely, while it has assisted some people, it's not the catch all for everybody.
Mm.
There's still a lot of diversity amongst the community of people with
Mhm.
disabilities. There's the understanding of disability has broadened and changed over the last um, 20 years, 10 years, 5 years as new generations come into the workforce and their perceptions of their abilities or disabilities has adapted as well.
Mhm.
Um, and that so we need to make sure that we're not leaving people behind in that process because we have this solution of remote work or hybrid work now, so we're fine. The truth is there's still many people who are left behind in that process, and those people who are disadvantaged even within the disability community in many ways, including those who were frontline workers working, doing customer service related work. Those roles have changed. We've seen
Mhm.
that happen, and so we want to make sure that we're not um, opening one door, closing others along the way as well. So I think this is an important conversation to have.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. There's so many things that you had highlighted as well in terms of what progress looks like. I guess that's such a broad kind of way to encompass everything that's happening, right? I mean, there's, to your point about COVID, there was a lot of recognition in terms of what wasn't working, especially when the shift from in-person supports went online. There was a huge, huge eye opener in terms of, okay, so yes, we had to do this, but are we supporting folks in the way that we need to? Do they have the technologies in place to access these support systems that are now online, et cetera? Um, so yes, a lot of great points that were kind of brought up through your introduction there. I wanted to kind of take a deep dive, just highlighting progress, because everyone wants to talk about it in terms of this is a commitment and this is how we've progressed. When it comes to implementation, whether that's in reference to accessibility and EDIB, that's another thing that's happening is that accessibility, for some reason, is it's on its own subject matter when it needs to be encompassed within EDIB as part of EDIB work. A natural embedment, I have to say. But
Yeah.
there's still this conversation about EDIB and then accessibility.
And yeah, it's
So,
kind of in the parameter in the
yeah.
parentheses at the end, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that in terms of for folks who are listening and are really looking to implement change in whatever that might look like, whether that's in the digital space, whether that is internally in terms of just conducting meetings, or what would you have to say in terms of the thought process where folks are just compartmentalizing EDIB and then accessibility is kind of an attachment to that space?
Well, I understand why people feel the need to compartmentalize because we are often driven by legislation and different parameters that we're faced with. And so with with the use of provincial legislations like the AODA in Ontario and other provinces, and now the Accessible Canada Act federally, there's this need to, like, we're going to have to meet this mandate. Here's the obligations under that law. So it's easy to subsect it out and be like, what are the must do's?
Mhm.
But I'd like to say that accessibility for me is a foundational piece in all our work across EDI and EDIB, because disability, even though it's one, and living with a disability is one of the four employment equity groups, it's the group that anybody can join at any time, regardless of what your experiences have been in the past. So we always need to be considering that that's a possibility across all experiences, plus the intersectionalities of other lived experiences along with that,
Mhm.
right? So being a racialized, being a member of the visible minority community, and having a disability has a different impact on the way you view the world, right? And being able to make sure that we're looking at accessibility as a foundational piece. Because oftentimes, if we think about accessibility, we're opening the doors to a wider range of people beyond those who would identify as I am a disabled person or a person who lives with disabilities. So I think there's an opportunity there to say, let's look at disability as an opportunity. Let's look at accessibility and the universal design as an opportunity to start building those practices and processes. And so beyond the technology of adaptive technologies that we use in our IT spaces or on our websites, for example, that also opens it up to people who may English maybe not be their first language, it may be their third, fourth, fifth language, who knows? It opens it up to older adults who again don't necessarily define themselves as living with disabilities, but need functionality in terms of their spaces and their the way they view the world. It opens ourselves up to people visiting our countries, visiting our spaces. There's such an opportunity here to look at things differently. And if you look at it with a holistic lens, we all benefit from that experience. So there's a great opportunity there in terms of doing that. And so there's lots of knowledge within the disability community. You have a lot of experts who have learned to navigate in an accessible world and are coming forth with solutions and saying this could work. Like, let's talk about what this means in terms of implementation, because the benefits are exponential beyond the disability community. By the way, the disability community itself is not small, right? We're now talking almost 25% of our population. and looking at how we define disability within the Canadian context. But you add in family members, friends, and then other groups that I mentioned outside of that, and we're talking a vast majority population. And if you need to make a business case for that, there you go, right? In terms of how do I embed this into my daily work? And it's by asking myself the questions of who do I need to include in this discussion? Do I have a diversity of voices? So it's not enough to have one person with a disability and say, I've gone to that one person and that is it. Christine is not the answer for all things, right? Like you need to have a variety of experiences to really get that true fulsome experience of the diversity of persons with disabilities and their intersectionalities. So you have an opportunity to who bring those people in, making sure that voices are heard and that the advice given, the experience shared is acted upon. As you said in the opening, you don't want to just say the things, you actually want to do the work. Right. And that's where I challenge people to actually, what can we do on a daily basis to move this forward and have an opportunity to have those discussions.
Yeah. No,
Right?
that's such a great point that you brought up in terms of whether that's disability, whether that is kind of really looking to implement equitable practices. I really remember um, joining the workforce in one of the not-for-profits, and they were looking to create the strategic plan around EDIB work and everything. And then they came to me. I was probably the only woman of color who was an immigrant and all these things. And they said, okay, so we would really love for you to design this. And I said, okay, I can speak it from my perspective. I can't speak for everyone. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
but that is the challenge or the problem, part of the overcoming or also not over exhausting, you know
It's
um
that burden narrative of like
yeah,
now I have to live it, but I need to teach all other people what it, constantly and somehow represent very diverse communities that I may or may not have that experience. And
right,
it's important to
exactly.
recognize where my experience lies and where I'm willing to learn.
Yeah, exactly. And
Right?
I feel like part of the organizations right now, what they're facing is, I feel like there's a couple of things. One is really wanted to, make impactful change with an internal, so that it reflects what we're doing externally. But oftentimes, what happens is there's this notion of, oh, well, we don't have the funds to make these changes. And sometimes it's true, depending on if it's a building environment, you have to kind of redesign the infrastructure. Okay, that makes sense. But there's often this the same mentality of, we don't have the money like to make these things happen. So what are some of your things that you want to say in response to that mindset of not having funds?
Well, that is a reality for many people, and we are in a very economically um interesting time where we're seeing the remnants of COVID and what that has how that has impacted our economy, and recognizing that
Hmm.
it is our diverse communities, persons with disabilities, women, and a variety of other experiences that are most acutely feeling those experiences. But it's also there are things that you can do that are the daily activities of how do I make sure that I'm including the voices of people of diversity? How am I making sure that I'm thinking about accessibility in a broad way that is, that is truly meaningful to the experience of the, whether that be the end user, my employee, my customer, my family members and friends,
Hmm.
right? Because we all are connected to if it's not my own lived experience, there's somebody who I can resonate with who has experience that I want to make better. So it's those attitudinal shifts of even the like to start by saying we don't have the money, therefore we'll do nothing is ultimately the biggest challenge, right? Yes, there are things that cost money. You want to make sure that you are respecting people and their time and their expertise and all those things. But it starts by saying, what can I do on a daily basis? So
Hmm.
when I see things that are happening that are ableist or or discriminatory or derogatory towards, I can stand up and say, you know what, we don't use that language here. Here's what we use instead, and here's why. It's understanding that I can educate myself on a variety of other experiences, and become an ally in that process. and
Yeah, thank
using
you for
my
bringing up that.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, Christine. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just gonna say using my own, like, as an ally in different spaces, we have different power and privilege that we can then share and make sure that we are making space for those discussions. And oftentimes it starts with that attitudinal shift before you get into issues of finance and where's the learning space there. I'm a big proponent of the learning before you know, and then you know where you're spending your money, and it's more effective that way.
Mm. No, that's such a great point because there's sometimes what happens is whether there's a person who's being onboarded or whether that's a person who's volunteering their time, there is a kind of foundational training piece that happens with an EDIB that could be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. And then the headspace is, okay, well, I did the training and so I'm done, right?
Yeah,
But there
yeah,
isn't this um there's still this struggle with no, it's a continuous process. You need to continue to learn, you need to continue to engage the disability community. You need to continue if you don't know, then you need to ask instead of implementing something that's not going to work. So there is this I think even recently, I don't know who I spoke to someone recently and part of the conversations within the not-for-profit sector was, so how are you equipping, folks that are working in the organization as it relates to ensuring that the conversations are inclusive, to ensure that events or meetings, whatever that might be, so folks know. And so the response was, well, they did like an hour of EDIB training, and yeah, that's professional development. And my, my thought process, okay, that's a great start. But what else is being provided, right? So there's this thing of I feel like sometimes there's this mindset of just checking the box and saying, well, we did it, an
yeah.
hour, you know. Um, but can you talk to me a little bit about the continuous learning? You alluded to this before, the continuous learning and the continuous engagement with external communities, with the disability community on just learning, because there's oftentimes this assumptions that happen in terms of what is needed for the disability community, and then after things happen, you're like, well, we did it for you, and you're like, well, you didn't even ask me. Can you
Yeah,
talk to me?
yeah,
Yeah, so can
yeah.
you talk to me a little bit about that?
Absolutely. The continuous learning doesn't mean always sitting in a classroom or sitting around in front of a computer and doing e-learning. That's a good start to be like, oh, let the ideas percolate a little bit about like, but it really should be I too am a big proponent of adult learning and the continual learning process. My takeaway is always for people when I'm designing a training or when I'm thinking about training, what are the calls to action for that person after they leave here? And how do we embed that in so that there's a transfer of learning from that learning space into the day-to-day workplace? So it's about how do we continue these conversations? What are the things you learn in there that you're thinking about 2, 3, 6 months later? And I had that opportunity to say, yeah, because I did that training, it spurred me to do more reading in a particular area. I found an author I was interested in. I found some great online resources that I thought provide a variety of perspectives. Those kind of things that online learning. And um I want to encourage people to do their own learning as an ally and have that opportunity for discussion because um, while there's many people who have different disability experiences, you don't want to put that burden of like, teach me everything about being a person with a disability that I need to know. And the truth is, I've had disabilities my entire life, and my experiences change on a regular basis, right? And so I can only share with you my experience or sometimes a very few experiences of those from other people who've allowed me to share them, right? And so, but that doesn't cover, as we said, the scope of experiences. So trying to find ways to educate yourself, having those opportunities for discussion is really valid, and having an open mind to the process, understanding that history has changed, right? The way we viewed disability 50 years ago is not the way we view disability now, right? Really looking at it as a social issue and a need for inclusion versus a medicalized problem that is the problem lies with in the individual. So really shifting that mindset of making a space that is truly inclusive and allows belonging for all.
Yeah, no, that's such a great great point. You're also putting the focus on self accountability in a way, right? Because
Yeah.
it's not up to me to tell you how it is to be me. Like that's not that's, you can we can talk about it, but the is I'm not it's not my responsibility. And I feel like oftentimes that is the conversation that sometimes happens is that, oh, okay, well, can you teach me how I should, talk to you, or like one of those things. And sometimes there's just that singular approach, right? It's like,
Yeah.
okay, we're going to invite you for this presentation for all 50 of us, and you're going to tell us how we can. And that's not the point, right? It's like, where's that accountability piece for you? It's like, okay, well, I'm going to take the time, intentional time, to actually learn by myself. It's going to, whatever you want to call it, whether it's professional development, whether it's in the work that you're doing. I love the kind of piece around self accountability for folks to ensure that they're continuously implementing change and not waiting for someone to complain or waiting for something to happen. Um, because there's obviously still a lot of work that needs to be done, but there's still organizations that go through these things in terms of how do we start? Where do we start? How do we make sure that the onboarding is appropriate? How do we make sure that we're not burdening this one person to talk to us about EDIB because they're the only
Yes.
with, with a disability? Or there's this still the headspace that invisible disabilities, or physical disabilities are more than visible disabilities, and we know that that's not true, because I have an invisible disability, but people wouldn't know if they just look at me, right? So it's all those
Yeah.
things where or the shock factor is like, what do you mean you have a disability? It's like,
Yeah.
what do you want me to say to that? So it's
And
it's
clearly there's already a judgment there
yes.
and so you got to be able to unpack some of those things.
Mhm.
And I do
Yeah.
believe those conversations are important and the self accountability is important. I just don't want the burden to always fall to the person who is with the lived experience to be, sometimes we just want to have a day where I don't need to have a 20-minute conversation with somebody about the inaccessibility of their service. Right.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
talk about something else. Yeah, or you tell
Yeah.
me. But yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to ask you, what is your hope, I guess, when it comes to progress within in disability inclusion? What is your hope, or what is your hope in terms of call for action for folks, I guess, in the year of 2024 when it comes to this space?
That's a great question. That's a big question. I have many hopes. And I see our journey around EDIB as a it's a long-term journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So oftentimes these are things that are the journey towards full inclusion and the sense of belonging is a long-term goal. But ultimately I would like to see people as allies recognize their ability to be allies and where that accountability comes in, that self accountability that you spoke of so nicely. I think that's a really key piece. But also, representation matters, and we haven't talked a lot about that. But I'd love to see other people who are able to speak to their own disability experience come and share those things and say, I am a manager, I am this thing, I am a you know I am a senior leader in an organization, I am and you can be a variety of things, but representation at all levels of an organization is really key because you need to see people who resonate your own experiences at various levels and in various spaces to know that you too can go into those spaces. So I'd like to see, that continue to grow and increase across all of our employment fields, across all of our social spheres, to have the opportunity to say, wow, look at these people out there who are sharing parts of their experience that also represent me, and
Mhm,
so that I'm part of the community
mhm.
in a way that isn't always about having to complain, as you said, and it's about just being able to be included and know that you can go into a space and not have to have a plan A, plan B, and a plan C for every situation in case something is inaccessible. Right? There's a value in comfort and being able to walk through the world without having to constantly think about those things. And I think we're
Yeah.
working on that.
Yes, I love that piece around it's not a sprint, because you're absolutely right in terms of organizations feeling like, okay, we need to do XYZ, Which sometimes you can do XYZ within 6 months. You don't need to wait for 2 years.
Yeah.
But progress is progress, right? Some things you can measure in terms of, okay, well, what do we do immediately in terms of our onboarding process, in terms of how do we have this first call to make sure that folks are feeling like it is an accessible conversation. Like, how do we do those things? And there's the long haul of, okay, well, how do we make sure that this infrastructure is built um, in a way that it is accessible to all? So that's like the long term goals as an example, right? So I love that conversation piece around that as well. And to be honest, yeah, the disability space, the conversation is constantly evolving. As tech is evolving in terms of how we can put in implement digital practices that are inclusive, and if not anything, making it more of an outlier for for folks. So there's constantly conversations, but you're absolutely right in the sense of we need to be more we need to recognize more. I mean, there needs to be more representation in terms of, okay, I can see myself in this, right? So there is a lot of progress to be made, but I do see that the progress is happening, and I especially am I've found definitely even when the pandemic happened, it certainly unveiled so much, but it um, amplified so much more in terms of, okay, well, are we providing the right support systems to the extent that we need to? And how can we learn and unlearn along the way and how we've done things? And I think that's such a significant piece because we always talk about lessons learned. We don't talk enough about unlearning some of the things that we're putting in place, right?
Great point.
Yeah.
Great point. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So this is so awesome. I'm so grateful for our conversation today. And there's so many key takeaways. And my hope is that folks, yes, listen, but I hope that there is a call to action, whether that's within the self in terms of how we're approaching conversations or how we're creating change in the organizations or in the communities that we're in. So here's to 2024. I can't wait to see how things unravel towards the end of this year and to do some reflection and some pausing as well. So that will be really great.
Great. Thank you so much for having this conversation and for creating this space to have these opportunities, because I think it is so valuable in the work that you're doing. So I really appreciate everything you're doing, Samaya.
Thanks, Christine.